So, you're here for Robin Hood. That's unfortunate because I think that the Norman Conquest is pretty cool and I think we should talk about it first.
Clever girl.
And then I guess afterward, if you still really want to, we can talk about Robin Hood a little bit, even though he might not have existed at all, but that's for later. First, the Norman Conquest. The long and the short of the Norman Conquest is that it was the conquest of the Normans taking over England.
Wow.
And I'm sure you could have never guessed that based on the name. But in order to understand this story, we need to start a little bit further back. To start, you only need to know about two people, King Charles of France and the Viking Rollo. The year is 911, and the Viking Rollo has been terrorizing France for years, and King Charles has had enough. Charles decides that to stop Rollo, he's going to give him a pretty sweet deal. Simply sign here, and you will receive all the land between the River Epte and the sea, and I'll even throw my daughter Gisela. All that's required of you is that you swear loyalty to me and promise to protect France from any other Vikings that become a problem. Rollo seemed to think that this was a pretty good deal, so he took it. They then named the land Normandy, and the people that lived there, Normans, literally meaning Northmen. Now, to understand the rest of our story, we need to fast forward just a little bit. The year is now 1066, and there is a lot going on. Some of our new players include Duke William of Normandy. He is a descendant of the Viking Rollo, and he likes to shoot people in the eye. Then we have Edward the Confessor. He's good at not ruling for very long, and he's a literal saint. Like, actually, according to the Catholic Church. Then we have Earl Harold Godwinson. He is also not good at ruling for a very long time, and it's impossible to say his name without saying it in a regal voice. Finally, we have King Harald Hardrada of Norway, and this is a different Harold this time. His name is spelled weirdly, and he likes to exploit his family history for gain. Now, I know that you just got to know Edward the Confessor, but he has a complicated backstory we do not have time to get into right now. All you need to know is that he's dead, and when he dies, he is replaced by Earl Harold Godwinson. There's only one small problem. Actually, sorry, there are two small problems. Their names are Duke William of Normandy and King Harald Hardrada of Norway. Duke William of Normandy thinks that he should be the new king of England because he claims that Edward the Confessor, the dead one, promised him the throne back in 1051, and that Earl Harold Godwinson said that he would support that promise. Godwinson ended up taking the throne anyway, though. King Harald Hardrada of Norway also thought that he should be king of England because he was a descendant of a Dane who had briefly ruled England before the dead guy Edward. In late September, now trying to claim the throne that he felt was rightfully his, King Harald Hardrada decided to strike northern-ish England with over 200 ships and 8,000 men. They were promptly squashed
Like a grape.
by Earl Harold Godwinson's Anglo-Saxon army during the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So, King Harold Godwinson is secure as king. Well, not exactly. Just a few days after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, in early October, Duke William of Normandy brings his 10,000 troops to southernish England so that he can claim the throne. So, Harold Godwinson drags his battle-worn troops down from fighting the King of Norway to meet William in battle. And this is the Battle of Hastings. It is super duper important. Through all of my research, even the history buffs that don't like to have a ton of dates memorized, they know this one. Remember 1066, the Battle of Hastings.
Excuse me, brah. You're excused. And I'm not your bra.
To understand this battle, we need to understand that infantry are people on foot, cavalry are people that ride horses, and archers are the ones with bows and arrows. Harold's Anglo-Saxon army was basically all infantry, with a few archers sprinkled in there, whereas William's army was one half infantry, with the other half being made up of both cavalry and archers. William's army was also interesting because it didn't just include Normans. He also had listed other Frenchmen and people from other countries that neighbored Normandy. Okay, back to the battle. After squashing
Like a grape.
the other Harold's troops in northern England, Harold is marching his troops southward, hoping to surprise William. Unfortunately for Harold, William's scouts find Harold's army and decide to launch their own surprise attack.
Surprise, shawty!
Realizing that they've been found out, Harold and his army retreat a little bit and decide to take up defense on a small hill outside of Hastings, hence the Battle of Hastings.
Wow.
Harold's army formed a half-mile-long shield wall that held William off for most of the day.
We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice.
William was suffering because he had less infantry than Harold, and he was having to fight uphill. As a result, William either literally retreated or at least feigned a retreat. We aren't sure which one. This caused Harold's army to break their shield wall and chase the Normans because they felt sure of victory. Unfortunately for Harold, as William's infantry distracted the Anglo-Saxon army, the Norman cavalry was able to come in and squash smash Harold's forces. The battle ended with Harold getting shot in the eye. The final toll of the battle was 2,000 Normans dead and 4,000 Anglo-Saxons dead. William, now called William the Conqueror for hopefully obvious reasons, was crowned King William I of England on Christmas Day of 1066. Merry Christmas, England! Remember your brand new ruler, Harold, that was your king for less than a year? Yeah, I shot him in the eye and I'm your king now.
Boom, bam, bop, bada bop, boom, pow.
King William ruled happily ever after. Almost. The King of France wasn't too happy about William going off and doing his own thing now. You're only in charge of Normandy because I let your ancestor Viking Rollo have Normandy. I'm still in charge of you. What are you talking about? That was forever ago. I'm my own man now. And that whole fight is kind of what started France and Britain not being the best of chums. Anyway, William ended up spending most of the rest of his life in Normandy, though he still had a strong influence in England, being king. After he was made the king, he replaced all of the English nobility with French-speaking Normans who were loyal to him.
You're done. You're done.
This meant that the language of the upper class in England was now French. As time went on, the language of the Anglo-Saxon people and the French-speaking nobility merged to create Anglo-Norman. This eventually became modern-day English. Now we know who to blame for the smoking pile of garbage that we call our language. The Normans and the English living together went about as well as you can expect. That is, not very well. Over the years, the Anglo-Saxon people rebelled against the Normans, a lot, often not ending super well. Remember this part, it gets really important later. William ends up dying in 1087, and his son, William II Rufus, William II Rufus, we're going to call him Rufus, his son Rufus then took the crown. And this is disclaimer. Google Bard and other references seem to forget about Rufus guy, but other sources said that he did hold the crown for a while, so I'm not sure who to believe on this one. You've been warned.
I don't even know, I can't even tell you that,
When I asked for a timeline of rulers, Bard said that the story was quote-unquote full of royal drama, so naturally I asked for all the juicy details. And here they are. After William Rufus dies, his son Henry I rules. Henry dies, then leaving his daughter Matilda as heir to the throne. However, and here's the drama, Matilda's creepy cousin Stephen also claims the throne. So after a little civil war in which Stephen rules, both Stephen and Matilda come to an agreement that when Stephen dies, Matilda's son Henry II would then get to rule. Henry II then had King Richard the Lionheart. And here we are, Robin Hood. But first, and I know, we're almost there.
You lied. You lied to me.
It is important to understand how the vibes kind of are in England at this time. After the Norman Conquest, most of the land in England was controlled by Norman nobility, and there was a big divide between the ruling class and the common people. This meant that the poor were both angry and poor. We can attribute a lot of this problem to what we call the feudal system. The best explanation for the feudal system that I found was from Collins' dictionary. It says that feudalism was a system in which people were given land and protection by people of a higher rank and worked and fought for them in return. This is easier to understand when you look at one of these graphs, where people are just making deals with one another and offering land and other goods in return for food or services and protection. The main problem with this system is that you aren't really able to level up per se. If you were born a peasant, you're basically gonna stay a peasant. Now, I have something to confess. When I started working on this project, I didn't even know what the Norman Conquest was.
You're not an intellectual. You're a fake and a fraud.
And my whole understanding of Robin Hood was that he stole from the rich and gave to the poor, which wasn't necessarily entirely inaccurate. But when I went to find out more about who Robin Hood was, there really wasn't much in the way of evidence of his doings or even his existence. Only stories and legends. But let's pretend just for a moment that he did exist. There are kind of two versions of Robin Hood. Originally, he's kind of a dark character, nothing like the jolly do-gooder that you find in today's depictions. He was born a yeoman, basically a peasant with some land. He isn't super happy with the way things are, and he and his band will literally murder people that get in the way of what they want. And at this point in time, a lot of people are moving to England, which is causing a greater need for food, which means that more unpaid farming is required from the peasant class. In the oldest tales, King Richard's little brother John has already become the king, and he's begun stealing land from nobles. Basically, nobody likes him. And I'm sorry, but I had to add this. King John, he literally dies of dysentery, which I personally find hilarious. As time goes on, more people add their take on this story, adding characters like Friar Tuck and the Maid Marian. They try to make him more palatable, if we're being honest. Disney's version of this story is the most common nowadays, with King Richard still being alive, but away crusading while his little brother, Prince John, holds down the fort. In this version, Robin Hood and his merry men are loyal to King Richard, and do their best to stop John and the Sheriff of Nottingham from taking over England. To be honest, even though there are a million different adaptations and versions of Robin Hood, everything I've told you already is kind of all there is. But that's not what's important. What is important is what Robin Hood stood for, even though he may have used some not great methods. He represented service to others, and trying to make life better for those around him. He represented hope that normal people could take their lives into their own hands and become more than what they were told that they could be. While I was researching, I even came across people saying that commoners in England at the time would rather listen to the stories of Robin Hood than attend Mass. ChatGPT even said, quote, "Nevertheless, the enduring appeal of Robin Hood lies in his status as a symbol of resistance against oppression and a champion of the marginalized, regardless of the historical accuracy of his adventures." In the end, it doesn't matter if the stories of Robin Hood are true or not. Caring for those around us and trying to improve the world is a Christ-like attribute, and it would be a failure on our part to not recognize that in Robin Hood. Even though you should still definitely go to church for good stories like this one can teach us valuable lessons, and in many ways are like modern-day parables. I think one of the biggest ways that God's hand can be seen is in just how many adaptations of this story there are. A lot of people have been taught principles of charity through the story of Robin Hood, and I think that is pretty cool. Jumping back to the Norman Conquest, we can see even more of God's hand. Without the Norman Conquest, there would have been no English language for the Book of Mormon to be translated into. Even forgetting translation, the creation of the United States can be traced back to the evolution of England, and even the Norman Conquest. God was preparing a place where religion could be freely practiced for his divine purposes, and threads of that go pretty far back. As we've already talked about, it's important to recognize the good and the bad in history that we study, trying as we go to emulate the good and keep from repeating the bad. One of the best things that I have learned through this is that though it is not necessarily the most efficient way to learn, trying to teach others about a topic and creating something to do that forces you to gain a deeper understanding of the topic that you would not have otherwise been able to get. Robin Hood might not be real, but that's okay. You are. Choose to use your life for good, and not only you, but the world will be the better for it. Thank you for watching.